4ZZZ.
Eco Red.
Radical Radio Collective.
4ZZZ.
You're tuned into 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. This is Eco Radio. I'm Dave.
I'm Zack.
And we're going to start off by just jumping straight into an interview we've got with Dr James Udy. Dr James Udy is a marine scientist with Science Under Sail, a citizen science organisation that collects data on marine ecosystem health. James will also be making a presentation with Wildlife Queensland Bayside Branch this Friday at 7 p.m. James, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Dave.
Oh, no problem. So you're going to be talking about how flooding affects marine ecosystems. Recently, satellite images have emerged of the massive amount of muddy and fresh water running off into the Great Barrier Reef after severe flooding in North Queensland. How does this runoff actually affect marine ecosystems?
Well, I guess whether it's coral or seagrass, and they're probably the two habitats that we focus on the most, one because they're so important to all the things that we love about waterways and both our recreational and commercial use of them. Mm-hmm. But also, they're fairly dominant ecosystems, and they're both impacted by similar impacts. So there's two things, I guess, that you need for healthy seagrass and healthy coral, and that's for the light that's at the surface of the water to be able to get through the water down to the animal. So what we call it is benthic habitat or benthic organisms. So they're either plants or animals that are stuck to the bottom and can't move, mm-hmm. and it defines both coral and seagrass. Because of that, how deep they grow is very much controlled by the amount of light that gets to them. Now, they do need other things like nutrients, and obviously coral, sometimes, what's in the water and that they filter out may enhance their growth. But at the end of the day, even coral, because they are animals, but they have little plants that live inside them, and that's actually what causes the bleaching when they lose those plants.
Right.
So corals and seagrass are quite similar in that they both rely on photosynthesis, and that's driven by light availability. So when you have these floods along the coastline, that brings the turbid water out, and it does two things. In the short term, it cuts off the light. So it's like for you or me being put on a 1 week or 1 month starvation diet where the food is taken out of the fridge and there's no food available, and you're just told to, see if you can survive a month, and then in a month's time we put some food back in your fridge for you. And that's the same for them. For them, light equates to food. So you take away that light for weeks to a month, and often they will survive, but that makes them much less healthy in the same way if you or I was to starve for a long period.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of time as well.
Yeah, and then the second, I guess, is that not so immediate, but that sediment, and more often not the mud, like the sand's not a problem, but the mud's what really makes it out there and what stays in the water for a long period. But that eventually settles, and the trouble is when that settles, it leaves a muddy surface that the next time it's windy, and your audience will be aware, a windy day in Morton Bay, you see white caps everywhere. They resuspend that mud and bring it back into the water column. So it might be 6 months, a year, or even longer after a flood event, but that mud that came out during the flood is still having an impact. And a number that I often quote, because I was working with Healthy Land and Water back in the 2011 flood, sort of the first big flood in my career. And basically after that one flood, we went from originally 70% of Morton Bay was sandy and only 30% of it was muddy. So all the mud was along the western side, but the eastern side and a lot of the middle of the bay had clean sand at its surface. After that one flood, it went to 70% of the bay became muddy and only 30% of it was sandy. And now, more recently, after these, we've had the 2013 flood, and now we've had the 2022 flood. It's estimated that Morton Bay only really has 2 to 3% of its area that's considered pure or clean sand. And so that's sand that has less than 1% mud in it.
Right.
So it's estimated that it's gone from having about 400 square kilometres of clean sand back in the 1970s, before the 74 flood, through to only 30 square kilometres of clean sand now.
But haven't we always had floods in southeast Queensland? Why is it the big change between the 70s and now?
Well, we've always had floods. The big change isn't really from the 70s. Like the 1974 flood was incredibly devastating, but there's probably not that many people around that experience, in Brisbane now who experienced that 74 flood. And then we had a period without too many major floods. There were some smaller floods in the 1990s, and so it's not that we haven't had any, but I guess the 2011 was really the first big flood post the 74 floods, and also the one that I guess showed us that the Wivenhoe Dam is not going to save us from floods. What's happened is the way humans use the landscape. So both in the urban setting, so where we have all our houses, the houses themselves cause a problem because if you look at any subdivision, even once it's finished, the amount of hard roofs or concrete or roadways is immense. And in the new subdivisions, you're probably lucky if 20 or 30% of the land is what we call permeable surface, so land that water hits and can go into the ground rather than just running off to a stormwater drain.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've increased the amount of water running into our stormwater and the velocity, so the speed at which it goes. So pre-development, a raindrop would maybe hit a canopy or a tree as it came through and eventually make it to the ground and then seep into that ground. And so a lot of the water that falls as rain wouldn't actually make it to a river or a creek.
Yeah,
now,
right.
A lot more of the water makes it, and it makes it there a lot faster. So you get these real peaks, and those peaks are very, very erosive. The other two things are, in our agricultural landscape, the loss of riparian vegetation means that the creeks are much more likely to be eroded. So we have tons and tons of sediment coming down from our agriculture. We have farmers losing entire paddocks. I met with a farmer once who told me, he had this paddock where he used to grow broccoli, and the broccoli crop was worth, $300,000 or $400,000 a year to him, but he just lost the whole paddock. So that was hundreds of thousands of dollars of reduced income that he had because of poor management of the river system and the landscape, so to reduce that. And one thing, it all comes down to the amount of water and the speed that the water's travelling. Because if you can slow the water down and keep it in the landscape longer, then it causes less erosion. And if it does cause erosion and you slow it down, like there's things called leaky weirs that they put in, then the sediment resettles back up in the landscape where it's valuable soil. So I think we have to remember is, to a farmer, soil is very highly valuable, but once you transport that soil from the farms or from the urban development site into the waterways, it becomes a pollutant, and it's not helpful.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that runoff can be mitigated with mangroves, but recently a man was fined $40,000 for illegally clearing 1,200 square metres of protected mangroves. Why are mangroves so important to not only the protection of erosion, but also the marine ecosystem, such as the fish and dugongs?
Mangroves, along with seagrass habitat, I guess, provide really critical habitats for all of our commercial fisheries. So whether it be the bream that recreational fishers like to catch, or the crabs or the prawns, they are critical. One, because it's called organic loading is the fancy word for it, but it's basically just means that they get carbon, which is just a food source provided to them. In the case of mangroves, a lot of that comes from the leaf litter dropping.
Oh, yeah.
But they also provide a safe haven. At high tide, of course, at low tide, the fish have to move down into the seagrass meadows because there's no water in the mangroves. So, but at high tide, they provide both feeding and safe areas for little fish to live and grow. So they're often referred to as the nurseries of the fishing industry. So without the mangroves and the seagrass, you lose those nursery habitats, and eventually you'll lose the fishery that we all, those of us that like to eat seafood anyway, rely on, whether we catch it recreationally or whether we buy it from the local fish shop.
Yeah. And you do work with Science Under Sail. Can you tell us what Science Under Sail is?
Yeah, so Science Under Sail is, I guess, I have a few different sides. So I am a private consultant, so I do consultancy work for people like the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, Australian Institute of Sport, and locally Healthy Land and Water, as well as New South Wales Government. But the part that people know me best for, I guess, is my citizen science work, where we actually, groups of 8 to 10 people, go out on our research vessel, which is a 12-metre long sailing catamaran, and for normally a week, but any length of time from a day to several weeks, and do surveys of either seagrass or coral. So this month I have a couple of school excursions coming up, so I run school excursions, but also I run programs open to the general public as well.
Okay, and you go out for surveys. How can people get involved with that?
Well, pretty much follow my Instagram is the best way, because I advertise all the trips on Instagram.
Okay, yep.
So just Science Under Sail, and you should find it on Instagram, or Science Under Sail Australia on Facebook, or on find my webpage and send me an email. But yeah, it's dependent on funding, because what I try to do is keep the cost of the actual participants as low as possible. So what I do is company organisations that want the data come to me, and I provide a package. So the trips are subsidised by organisations like Healthy Land and Water in Moreton Bay, or Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service, who manage Moreton Bay Marine Park. They might want some survey data, and so I'll sign a contract with them, and then I'll use citizen scientists and give citizen scientists that opportunity to come out and experience what it's like to be a marine biologist doing field work and survey work.
Yeah, what type of surveys have you done in the past? What type of data have you collected?
Well, so with seagrass specifically, I guess before the flood, and this was funded by Healthy Land and Water, we did from 2016 through to 2021, so all the sort of 5 years pre-flood, we were collecting about 1,000 sites a year. So we were going out in something between 1,000 and 2,000 locations each year, and looking at what was on the bottom. So the percentage cover of seagrass, the species of seagrass that were present, and the water depth. So how deep the seagrass were growing, as well as sediment type, were things that we were recording. Mm-hmm. And that was really, really helpful, because what often happens with environmental management is the pre-monitoring is not funded, just because of it's hard to get the money together to sort of routinely go out and look at these important habitats. And then a catastrophe, or in this case a flood, comes along, and then suddenly everybody wants to know what impact that flood had. So because we had this pre-existing data, then post-flood we were able to do a project which was funded by some flood recovery money and Queensland Parks and Wildlife through the marine parks, where we actually went out to 5,000 locations in 2022-23 summer. So it was about 9 to 11 months after the flood had occurred to look and see what the long-term impacts of the flood had been. So we did have a few sites about 6 months after the flood to look at the shorter-term impacts, and that was devastating, where I actually thought we'd lost almost all the subtidal seagrass. So seagrass grows what we call intertidal, which are those areas of the bay that at high tide they're covered in water, but at low tide you can see them, and and you'll often see green things that almost look like a lawn, which is the seagrass meadows. Mm-hmm. And then seagrass also grows what's called subtidally, which is where it's never exposed. So even at low tide, it still has water. And when we did about 400 sites in August, and almost none of them had seagrass unless you were in that intertidal zone. All the subtidal seagrass had been lost, and Moreton Bay has lots of subtidal seagrass, and it's very important to both dugongs and turtles, as well as the fish and crabs that I mentioned earlier.
And so that was because of
that was
runoff?
Water from the floods. Yeah, the muddy water from the floods had killed that seagrass, basically starved it to death.
Oh, wow.
Luckily, though, we then did the intensive survey sort of November, December, January, and it appears that in that window from sort of August, which was just sort of the end of winter, which seagrass doesn't grow a lot in winter, through its growing season, which is spring. So September, October is when seagrass in Morton Bay grows the fastest. So post that first growing season, seagrass did recover to a large extent. It still was not as good, both in percent cover and in the area. So in where the seagrass occurred, it was smaller. Sorry, yep. You still there?
Yep.
Yeah, I got another call coming.
Oh, okay.
So the area that it covered wasn't as large as it had been pre-flood, but definitely a lot of that subtidal seagrass started to grow back, which was really encouraging.
Okay. Well, James, thank you for joining us. You're a very busy man, and we'll let you go, but you're going to be having a presentation at the Wildlife Queensland Bayside Branch this Friday, 7 p.m. At Alexandra Hills Community Hall.
Yes, so if anyone's interested in hearing more, that will be about 50 minutes to an hour, I think, and I'll have slides and photos from our survey, so it'd be great to see some extra people there and talk to you afterwards too.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, thanks very much for joining us, James.
Thanks a lot for your time, Dave.
No worries. That was our chat with Dr. James Udy from a marine scientist with Science Under Sail, who is also having a talk this Friday at Alexandra Hills Community Hall at 7 p.m. You're listening to 4ZZZ. This is Eco Radio.
4ZZZ is a proudly independent community radio station. We've been supported by our listeners since 1975. If you like what we do, you can support us for a whole year by subscribing to 4ZZZ online, over the phone, or in person at the station. Visit 4ZZZ.org.au/support for more details on how to keep community radio thriving.
You're listening to Eco Radio, the radio of the future.
You are listening to Eco Radio, the radio of the future. Thank you, small child.
I've trained you successfully, Dave. We've got there.
I also want to send out a big thank you to Ryan, who just subscribed to 4ZZZ or renewed a subscription to 4ZZZ. Thank you very much, Ryan. A less monotone thank you for Ryan.
And if you want to be like Ryan and support 4ZZZ, which is a community-run radio station, you can head to 4ZZZ.org.au/support. Subscriptions start for as little as $25 for a pet or under 18-year-old, and then there's a variety of things above that you can even get some cool little merch from.
Yeah, I'm always a big fan of the passionate subscription. I get a great tote and a great T-shirt, along with stickers and things that are designed by last year it was George Levi. Actually, it's been George for the last 3 years. Fantastic designs, and I'm a big fan. And Ryan has also gone into the running to win the regular monthly subscriber prize. For February, it's tickets to the QMAs for 4 people. So that's the Queensland Music Award. So I hope you good luck in that, Ryan, getting in to see the QMAs. That's great. Because we just talked to Dr. James Udy, is a marine scientist with Science Under Sail, and he's going to be having a presentation at the Alexandra Hills Community Hall this Friday at 7 p.m, and we'll hear more about that in the Bushcare Roundup. And you're tuned into 4ZZZ. This is Eco Radio. Let's go into some news. Staying with the marine ecosystem theme, there's a $40,000 fine has been handed out to a Queensland man for illegally clearing 1,200 square metres of protected mangroves near Brisbane. The mangrove habitat was poisoned and felled with a chainsaw. Some of the mangroves were found to be up to 700 years old.
That's a long time.
That's a long time, and to just be felled by a chainsaw, for better ocean views or whatever reason he thought is ridiculous. Speaking to Yahoo, a spokesperson for the State Department's primary industry said on top of the $40,000, the man has also been ordered to pay $7,000 in legal fees. Last year, a Townsville man was ordered to pay $145,000 for clearing 19,000 square metres of previously untouched wetlands to build a road, a private road. The Queensland Fisheries Act of 1994 protects all marine plants from removal, destruction or damage. Mangrove ecosystems provide habitat for aquatic creatures, filter land runoff, prevent soil erosion and store carbon in the soil. It is estimated that 17% of Australia's mangroves have been destroyed since European settlement.
What I find interesting with particularly rich people clearing off mangroves so they have a better ocean view is that mangroves are essentially a bit of a buffer zone between the harsh weather of the ocean and that of the land. So mangroves are actually useful in preventing things such as really harsh winds coming in across and causing property damage, and also just like they prevent water levels rising, that sort of thing, the soil erosion. They're very, very critical to I guess having that buffer zone between the land and the sea. And a lot of the people who clear it are rich people who are going to be
who want a jetty,
and then they're just going to be paying for it to damages for their property later on. So,
like you see the floods that we have here in southeast Queensland, you see massive erosion happen along the river where people have built their jetties, and you know it's just a drop off from where for meters from where the river is and where the mangroves used to be. And then they put in things like, oh, we'll just build a stone wall there, and it's not the same. Mangroves actually, when the runoff builds up on mangroves, it actually gives them more habitat to get stronger. Because mangroves have 4 different types of root systems. Did you know this?
I've probably learned it at some point, but I've forgotten it.
Okay, so they've got pencil roots, where they just stick up little roots out of the mud. And that's to give them, allow for them to have oxygen, because they're in brackish waters and they're often submerged in high tides. They have knee roots, where it looks like a little knee is sticking out of the mud, and that's kind of cool. Then they have prop roots, where they have stems, they have root systems that grow out like branches, but they go underneath the mud after that. Which is really cool. And then they have buttress roots, which are also really nice looking roots. There is a thing. Last week, I found out that you know every capital city of countries. Well,
I was hoping I'd get tested on this, but I forgot to do my practice beforehand just to refresh myself.
Good. I want to see how you go. What is the capital city of Eswatini?
Mbabane.
Yeah. Holy crap.
I was almost going to say the capital of Lesotho, but no, I caught myself.
Good work. You're very impressive. Okay, well, let's go with some more news. The Climate Change Authority has released new modelling showing that the Coalition's nuclear power plan will add 2 billion tonnes more of emissions into the atmosphere than the current future energy plan. So the Climate Change Authority is an independent government body which found that if the Liberal National Party win in the next federal election, and implement this nuclear power energy grid, the country will continue to burn fossil fuels instead of switching to renewables. This led the Climate Change Authority to show that delaying changing to renewable power generation, the country would continue to add the equivalent of 200 years worth of emissions from Australia's domestic flights in the subsequent 30 years that it takes to get to nuclear power. Under the Coalition's nuclear plan, Australia would also blow out its 2030 emissions targets by more than 5%, according to the authorities' modelling, and would be in line with the 2.6 degrees of warming. In retaliation of these findings, Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume said that it would be difficult to keep the head of the Climate Change Authority, Mr Matt Keane, who also is a former state Liberal Party minister.
We always love it when the finance minister is commenting on things regarding climate change.
Yeah, isn't that nice? But so this isn't that going to nuclear will add 200 billion. It would be that if we go to nuclear instead of going to renewables, we will keep the current coal-based or fossil fuel-based system for longer. And that's what is going to add the 200 billion.
Gotcha. So it's just like that transition period between moving from coal-based to nuclear.
Yeah. So it's really, put my cynical hat on, this push for nuclear is really just a kicking the can down the road system so that Gina and their mining buddies can keep producing fossil fuels for longer instead of changing to renewables.
Oh, well, they'll be dead before things get serious enough, I suppose.
Yeah, unless cryogenically freeze themselves or something.
Maybe. Oh, I might be okay with like a Futurama sort of like head in a fish tank sort of thing for them.
Oh, yeah.
They will technically be alive, but I can't imagine it would be particularly pleasant.
No, being stuck in the closet the whole time.
Yeah, and being fed fish flakes occasionally.
Yeah, that's right. All right, let's go to some more tracks. You're listening to 4ZZZ. This is Eco Radio.
Paradigm Shifts podcast is available online and via your favourite podcasting app, challenging the assumptions of our current society to investigate alternative ways of living for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Tune in to the Paradigm Shift podcast. Just search The Paradigm Shift for ZZZ.
And we have been talking about mangroves and marine ecosystems. Zack, did you want to talk about snakes for a little bit?
I can quickly talk about snakes. So there was there's a study being undertaken at the Australian National University in, I was going to say Queensland, but it's in Canberra, and it's been conducted by the Associate Professor Gavin Smith, and this examined the response of eastern brown snakes to relocation in Canberra. So for snakes that were caught in people's homes, they would go and relocate those to reserves, where theoretically you'd think the snakes would be doing better rather than being within all this housing developments, that sort of thing. But once they were relocated, the snakes were found to become really disoriented and develop erratic behaviour, and they also became less successful at hunting. They lost a ton of weight. They were more at risk of predators, and they were also doing things like crossing roads and getting run over, that sort of pleasant stuff. And this is essentially because snakes are found to have their own territory. They have an area that they know where all the resources are in that territory, and once you move them outside of this, they don't know where anything is. They're going to be lost and alone, that sort of thing.
So what's the recommendation now, though? So don't relocate them too far from their habitat, or from where they're found?
So the full study is expected to be released later in 2025.
Okay.
But sort of keeping them within the general area is ideal for the snakes' welfare, I suppose. But there is a bit of a fine line where I don't think a lot of people would want to have an eastern brown in their backyard. No. But in saying that,
even in their local park.
Yeah. In saying that, if they don't bother you, if you don't bother them, they won't bother you, sort of thing.
Okay.
But the concern is when you're gardening or something like that, and you're reaching and not looking properly. There's eastern brown sitting there.
Well, there are many opportunities for you to reach into the bushes because we're going to go now to the Bushcare Roundup.
It's a Bushcare Roundup. They've been pulling out weeds and then they put in trees. It's a Bushcare Roundup.
That was a very, very good segue there, Dave. I'm very impressed with that.
Gracias.
On Thursday the 27th from 7:30 till 9:30, we have the Lota Cliffs Habitat Group Bushcare Working Bee. That one is at the corner of Grace and Armytage Street in Lota. On Friday the 28th from 8:30 till 10 a.m, there is the Mother of Millions Bushcare at 47 Fleming Road, Chapel Hill, and that one is organised by Thika. And then from 7 till 8:30 p.m, we have the impacts of floods and climate change in Seagrass on Morton Bay. That one is at Alexandra Hills Community Hall in Alexandra Hills.
Yeah, that's the one we talked to Dr James Udy about earlier. On Saturday at 8 o'clock, you can go to the Crosby Road Bushcare Working Bee. That's in Ascot. At 9 o'clock, you can go to the Community Planting Flood Recovery. That's at Birdsong Place in Bunya, if you like to head out there. At 9 o'clock on Saturday, you can go to the Bulimba Creek Catchment Sustainability Centre Open Day. That's in Carindale. And at 1:30, you can go to the Scenic Rim Koala Community Forum in Bunya. That's the Bunya Cultural Centre.
On Sunday the 2nd, it is Clean Up Australia Day.
Yeah.
And then at 7 a.m, we have the March Tennis Avenue Bushcare, and that one is at Tennis Avenue Ashgrove. From 7 till 9 a.m, there's the February Bushcare Working Bee at 100A Jean Street, Grange. From 9 till 11 a.m, there's the Total Watch Clean Up Australia Day, and that one is at Phillip Park in Main Beach. Then from 4 till 6 p.m, we have the Orchid Pod Working Bee. That one is at Urala Street Community Garden in the Gap.
That's fantastic. That's everything we've got for you this week. Head to 4zzz.org.au to listen back, or you can find us on any podcast app of your choice, and follow our socials. My name's Dave.
My name's Zack, and you should stick around for Sonic Alien because they have Fontaine's DC coming onto the program, and they always guarantee that they will play some groovy tunes, so stick around, stay tuned into 4ZZZ. They will take care of you from 1 till 3.
Yeah, thanks very much for your listening. You've been listening to 4ZZZ Eco Radio.